After Russia, it looks like the Southeast Asian nation of Malaysia has decided to impose an energy blockade on Europe. Malaysia has threatened to block palm oil supplies to EU, which could worsen the energy crisis in the continent. Hi and welcome, you're watching India's World. We discuss geopolitics here. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for more interesting videos. Malaysia is livid at EU, so the Southeast Asian country has dropped a bombshell on the European economies. The country on Thursday said it could stop exporting palm oil to the European Union in response to a new EU law aimed at protecting forests by strictly regulating the sale of the product. The EU has announced plans to phase out palm oil by 2030, citing that palm oil production leads to massive deforestation in Malaysia and Indonesia. Under new laws passed in December, the EU has banned the sale of palm oil linked to deforestation unless importers can show that the production of their specific goods has not damaged forests. But Malaysia and Indonesia, the two biggest palm oil producing nations, have accused EU of erecting artificial measures to hinder the trade between EU and the Southeast Asian nations. Malaysian Minister Fadillah Yusof said in a statement, "If we need to engage experts from the overseas to counter whatever move by EU, we have to do it. Or the option could be we just stop exports to Europe. Just focus on other countries if the Europeans are giving us all a difficult time to export to them." Not just Malaysia, but Indonesia is also gearing up to teach EU a lesson of its life. Indonesia and Malaysia have launched separate cases with the WTO, saying the fuels measure is discriminatory and constitutes a trade barrier. Indonesian President Joko Widodo and Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim this week agreed to fight discrimination against palm oil and strengthen cooperation through the Council of Palm Oil Producing Countries, or CPOPC. But let us suppose if Malaysia and Indonesia impose a palm oil blockade on EU, it can trigger a massive energy crunch in the EU. According to data from 2018, 65% of all the palm oil imported into the EU was used for energy. 53% of all palm oil imports were used to make biodiesel for cars and trucks. 12% of palm imports are used to generate electricity and heating. In 2021, palm oil accounted for 23% of the total biodiesel output in the EU. If this source of energy is taken offline, it can gravely impact the transportation sector of EU in the absence of Russian fuel. It is important to note that research published by Europe Palm Oil Alliance back in 2020 revealed that some 86% of the European palm oil imports was sustainable. That is because both Indonesia and Malaysia have created sustainability certification standards mandatory for all plantations. So, as far as the environment is concerned, Malaysia and Indonesia are not shying away from their responsibilities. EU is likely going after these nations purely for political reasons. The two countries have rejected EU's economic sanctions on Russia. Indonesia, which hosted the G20 summit last year, declined to issue an anti-Russia statement and also welcomed Russia in the meeting, even as the Biden administration and EU were pressing it to boycott the Kremlin. To punish these nations for their neutral stance on the Russia-Ukraine war, EU is building trade barriers to hit the Indonesian and Malaysian economies. But the plan can very well backfire. Without palm oil energy, EU's energy sector is all set to face massive disruptions.
India's World, telling the right side of the story.